In April of 2024, the body of Mica Miller was discovered deep in the woods of Lumber River State Park, a serene location in North Carolina known for its natural beauty. But on that tragic day, the peace of the park was shattered by a single gunshot, one that ended the life of a young woman who had been battling a tumultuous and increasingly dangerous relationship with her estranged husband, Pastor John Paul Miller. Mica, who was a mother of two and former member of a tight-knit religious community, was found with a gunshot wound to her head. The official investigation, which included surveillance footage and an examination by the medical examiner, ruled her death a suicide. The park's cameras captured Mica entering alone, and no signs of foul play were immediately detected. But for those who knew her best, particularly her family, this explanation did not sit right. Mica had been terrified for her life in the weeks leading up to her death. She had made numerous police reports documenting harassment, stalking, and even tampering with her car. Her family couldn't believe she would take her own life, especially when she had spoken out about her fear that someone was going to kill her. Mica's death has since become the subject of intense public speculation, raising the question, was this truly a case of suicide, or was there more to the story? As more disturbing details about her estranged husband, John Paul Miller, and their relationship emerged, including allegations of abuse, manipulation, and extreme control, the possibility of foul play began to dominate conversations. Mica had been living in fear of the man that she once loved, and as we explore her life, her marriage, and the events leading up to her tragic end, the question remains, what really happened to Mica Miller? Mica Miller was born in Wichita, Kansas, and she grew up in a family that was deeply rooted in their faith. From a young age, she was raised in a religious environment that emphasized community, devotion, and obedience to God. Her family eventually relocated to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where they became active members of Solid Rock Church, a well-known Christian congregation in the area. It was within this church that Mica's life would begin to intertwine with that of John Paul Miller, or J.P. Miller, the church's charismatic pastor. Solid Rock Church played a significant role in shaping Mica's adolescence and young adulthood. She was a regular attendee of church events and youth group activities where J.P. Miller was a prominent figure. As the church's leader, J.P. was not only the spiritual guide for the congregation, but also he was deeply involved in the lives of its members, especially the younger women. He was seen as a trusted mentor, someone who could be relied upon for guidance and support. Mica's involvement in the church led her to meet Jeremy Diaz, a young man who shared her faith and devotion. In her early 20s, Mica and Jeremy married, a union that was celebrated by the church. But their relationship, though initially filled with hope and love, began to unravel under the influence of J.P. Mica's relationship with her pastor grew closer, with J.P. assuming an increasingly dominant role in her life. He allegedly began grooming her, manipulating her emotionally and spiritually under the guise of a religious counsel. J.P.'s control over Mica started to extend beyond their spiritual connection. He began to interfere in her marriage to Jeremy, sowing seeds of doubt and discord between the young couple. Jeremy, feeling the strain, eventually separated from Mica, and their divorce in 2015 was really a turning point in Mica's life, marking the end of her first marriage and the beginning of an even darker chapter with JP. But the end of Mica's marriage to Jeremy was only the beginning of the public scandal that would shake Solid Rock Church to its core. In the aftermath of their separation, it became apparent that Mica's relationship with JP had grown beyond a pastoral bond. Whispers of an affair between JP and Mica began circulating within the church, raising eyebrows and causing a rift among its members. Though the details were initially kept under wraps, the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. In 2015, the affair between Pastor John Paul Miller and Mica was exposed, leading to an explosive revelation that not only destroyed their respective marriages, but also caused deep fractures within the church community. Before things spiraled into scandal, Mica seemed to be living the life that she always imagined. She was young, married, and deeply involved in her faith community at Solid Rock Church. Her marriage to Jeremy Diaz was a natural step for her, They were both devoted to their church, and Jeremy shared Mica's deep commitment to their religious beliefs. On the surface, they seemed like this perfect couple, really grounded in their faith and dedicated to their future together, but under the surface, things were far more complicated. The cracks in Mica and Jeremy's relationship started to show early on, and much of that had to do with J.P. Miller, like I mentioned. As the pastor of Solid Rock, JP had been a major influence in Mica's life for years, and his role as a spiritual leader gave him a certain authority. But what started as guidance quickly shifted into something much darker. Mica, who trusted JP as a mentor and leader, began relying on him more and more, and JP, sensing this vulnerability, allegedly really took advantage of it. It wasn't long before JP started inserting himself into Mica's personal life. He had a way of twisting religious teachings to fit his own agenda, subtly convincing Mica that her marriage to Jeremy was not right for her. And according to reports, JP used his position to manipulate her emotionally, all while portraying himself as this person that she could turn to for spiritual counsel. And over time, Mica became more and more distanced from Jeremy, and the love and connection that they once shared began to fade. So JP's influence on Mica did not just stop with words. He allegedly played a direct role in their separation, convincing Mica that her marriage wasn't part of God's plan for her. The emotional manipulation ran very deep, and Mica, struggling under the weight of JP's influence, eventually left Jeremy. So in 2015, their marriage officially came to an end. Jeremy, heartbroken and confused, later spoke about how he felt that JP had taken advantage of Mica's trust. And from his perspective, Mica had been groomed, manipulated by someone who was supposed to help her, be her spiritual guide, only to have that trust ultimately used against her. And his suspicions weren't far from the truth. Soon after their divorce, the truth about JP and Mica's affair came to light, and the fallout was devastating. The revelation of Mica's relationship with JP wasn't just a shock. It sent shockwaves through Solid Rock Church and beyond. The affair, which had been brewing under the surface for years, was finally exposed in 2015, the same year she got divorced from Jeremy, and the fallout was immediate and explosive. Mica and JP had both been seen as these respected figures within their religious community. JP, as the church's pastor, was trusted and admired by many. He had built this loyal congregation that followed his teachings and truly looked to him for spiritual guidance. And Mica, in turn, had always been seen as this devout and faithful member of the church. But when the truth about their affair came to light, everything changed. The details of how the affair was exposed are still kind of murky, but once it became public knowledge, both Mica and JP's marriages crumbled. JP, who had been married with children, was forced to face his own crumbling personal life, and his wife filed for divorce soon after the affair was uncovered. So JP was left dealing with this fallout from his congregation, many of whom were shocked and disgusted by his actions. And some members even left the church altogether, unable to reconcile the man that they had trusted with the person who had literally just betrayed their families and their faith. For Mica, the consequences were equally devastating. The public nature of this affair meant that her reputation within the church took a significant hit. Though she had been manipulated by JP, the stigma of the affair followed her everywhere. Those who didn't know that she had been groomed looked at her as more of a homewrecker, and friends and family who had once supported her began to question her actions, and the pressure became overwhelming. Despite the intense public scrutiny, Mica and JP chose to continue their relationship. In 2017, they got married, which was a decision that further alienated them from many of their former friends and church members. But what might have seemed like a fresh start quickly turned even darker. Their marriage was far from this redemptive story that some may have hoped for. Instead, it became clear that JP's controlling behavior had not ended when the affair became public. In fact, it only worsened. JP's manipulation of Mica didn't stop with their marriage. As their relationship progressed, Mica found herself increasingly isolated, both emotionally and physically. JP's influence over her life deepened, and what began as this emotional manipulation during their affair became something much more sinister. When Mica and JP Miller got married in 2017, it seemed like they were trying to move past the chaos and the fallout of their affair. But instead of the fresh start that they might have hoped for, their marriage marked the beginning of a far darker chapter in Mica's life. The public scandal surrounding their relationship had alienated them from many of their friends and family, and it didn't take long for the cracks in their new life to start showing. For Mica, life after marriage with JP became a nightmare. What had started as emotional manipulation and control during their affair intensified as JP's behavior became more and more controlling. Behind closed doors, Mica faced a growing list of responsibilities. JP expected her to help manage the church, but he also kept very tight control over every aspect of her life. He isolated her from her friends, her family, and anyone who might challenge his influence over her. According to those close to Mica, JP's controlling behavior was relentless. He would track her movements, restrict her interactions with other people, and constantly criticize her decision-making. Over time, Mica began to confide in a few trusted friends and family members about JP's abusive behavior. She described feeling trapped, emotionally exhausted, and increasingly fearful of her husband. Mica's fear was not unfounded. By 2022, things had taken a very dangerous turn. JP's control was not just emotional, it had become physical, or at least threatened. Mica began speaking out about the possibility of physical abuse, and those who were close to her noticed changes in her demeanor. She became very withdrawn. She seemed anxious, always careful about what she said and did, as if she was always walking on eggshells around her husband. By 2023, Mica had had enough. She began making plans to leave JP, but extricating herself from the marriage was not going to be easy. JP, who had always been able to manipulate Mica, wasn't going to let her go without a fight. And as Mica started talking to lawyers and making preparations for divorce, JP's harassment only escalated. He began stalking her, constantly showing up at places that she frequented, even going as far as to install GPS tracking devices on her car. Mica filed several police reports about JP's behavior, but the harassment did not stop. He seemed determined to maintain control over her, no matter what it took. Friends reported seeing Mica's car with razor blades planted in the tires, a clear sign of JP's intimidation tactics. And these actions, combined with the increasing emotional abuse, pushed Mica to a breaking point. She was desperate to get away from JP, but his presence in her life seemed inescapable. By October of 2023, Mica had reached her breaking point. After years of emotional manipulation, threats, and escalating harassment, she finally filed for divorce from JP. The filing came as no surprise to those closest to her. Mica had been planning her escape for months, and the divorce documents cited adultery and the growing hostility between the couple as reasons for the split. But behind the legal language was a story of intense fear, control, and desperation. The divorce marked the beginning of a bitter legal battle between Mica and JP. Despite Mica's attempts to cut ties and just move on with her life, JP was not going to let her go that easy. His behavior, already concerning, became more aggressive. He began stalking Mica relentlessly. Friends and family recalled how JP would frequently show up wherever Mica went, often without her knowing how he could be tracking her movements so precisely. And the answer to that mystery came soon enough when Mica discovered that JP had installed GPS tracking devices on her car, allowing him to follow her every move. This discovery only heightened her fear. Feeling more vulnerable than ever, Mica reached out to law enforcement for help. She filed multiple police reports documenting JP's harassment, detailing how he had tracked her, followed her, and even tampered with her car. As Mica tried to move forward with the divorce, JP's harassment escalated. He became increasingly unpredictable, showing up at gas stations where Mica stopped, continuing to track her through the GPS devices that he'd planted. And even with police reports filed, Mica felt like no one could stop JP from tormenting her. She confided in friends and family that she feared for her life, telling them that she believed JP would kill her if she didn't manage to escape him for good. In addition to the physical stalking, JP began attacking Mica's reputation online, and in a particularly disturbing move, JP admitted to posting explicit images of Mica on the internet as part of a sick attempt to humiliate her and control her. Mica was devastated by this violation of her privacy and her dignity, and the internet harassment only added to the psychological toll that JP had been inflicting on her for years. As 2023 turned into 2024, Mica's situation became increasingly dire. Her mental health, already strained from years of abuse, deteriorated further under the constant pressure of JP's harassment. She was involuntarily committed multiple times in the months leading up to her death, an act that she believed was orchestrated by JP as part of his efforts to maintain control over her. Mica confided in her sister Sierra about her fears, telling her that she believed JP was trying to paint her as unstable so that he could continue his abuse without consequence. Despite her efforts to get help from authorities and distance herself from JP, it seemed like Mica could never fully escape his grasp. Her final months were marked by fear, isolation, and a growing sense of hopelessness. She knew that her life was in danger, but every attempt she made to seek protection was met with just frustration. Mica's family tried to support her as best they could, but JP's influence seemed to extend far beyond what anyone could have imagined. In April of 2024, the unthinkable happened. After months of living in fear, Mica's body was discovered deep in the woods of Lumber River State Park, a tranquil area in North Carolina. The scene was devastating. Mica had been found dead from a gunshot wound to the head, and the authorities quickly labeled it as a suicide. Surveillance footage from the park showed Mica entering alone, and there were no immediate signs of foul play. However, to those who knew her best, the suicide ruling seemed impossible to accept. In the days leading up to her death, Mica had been vocal about her fears for her life. She had told her sister Sierra that she believed JP was going to kill her and that if anything ever happened to her, it would not be by her own hand. Her family was adamant that Mica would not have taken her own life, particularly given the fact that she had been fighting to escape from JP's control. Her growing sense of fear and hopelessness wasn't a sign of suicidal intent. It was a sign that she felt her life was in danger. The police, however, stood by those initial findings. The medical examiner's report supported the suicide ruling, pointing to the nature of the gunshot wound and the lack of any defensive injuries. But Mica's family was not convinced. To them, the circumstances of her death were just too suspicious, especially given JP's history of harassment and control. Adding to the family's suspicion was the fact that in the weeks before her death, Mica had continued to experience intense harassment from JP. The GPS tracking devices on her car, the razor blades found in her tires, and JP's online attacks had all contributed to Mica's growing paranoia. She had gone to the police multiple times, desperate for help, but nothing seemed to stop JP from tormenting her. For her family, it wasn't hard to imagine that JP had played a direct role in Mica's death, whether by forcing her hand or by staging the scene to look like a suicide. But what made the situation even more complex was the explicit online harassment that Mica had endured in the months leading up to her death. JP had confessed to posting intimate images of Mica on the internet, a move that humiliated and devastated her, and this act of betrayal left Mica feeling even more isolated and vulnerable. The idea that she would have chosen to end her life while still fighting to escape JP's abuse didn't add up to those who knew her very well. And despite the police ruling, many believe that the full story of what happened to Mica has yet to be told. Her family continues to push for further investigation, convinced that there's more to this case than what the initial findings suggest. They have called for a re-examination of the evidence, hoping to find some proof that Mica's death was not a suicide, but the result of foul play. The online community has also taken an interest in this case, with many questioning the official narrative. Mica's story has become a subject of intense discussion on social media, with people sharing their own theories about what really happened to her. Some point to JP's history of abusive behavior as evidence that he could have staged her death, while others believe that the police may have overlooked critical details in their rush to close the case. And in my opinion, one of the things that I think really shoved this story into the spotlight was JP's actions after Mica was found dead. So he immediately went to his congregation the very next day, stood in front of the congregation, gave his sermon, and then at the very end, this is what he had to say.
We're not going to do an altar call today. Instead, I'm going to have you stand up, and I'm going to make an announcement. And after the announcement, I'm going to ask that you leave church quietly and don't talk about the announcement here in the building, please, if you can, so y'all can stand to your feet. Before I make the announcement, I also want to say that my request to you is that you will continue to come to church and serve and give for the next little bit, because I don't want to have. I'm taking a little bit of a break, and I don't want to have to worry about the church. My break may be a few days, a few weeks, I don't know. I got a call late last night. My wife has passed away. And it was self-induced, and it was up in North Carolina. And we're going to have a funeral for her next Sunday here at 3 p.m. And so it's all I can, I'm just kind of going on adrenaline right now. So y'all pray for me and my kids and everybody. And she wasn't, y'all knew that she wasn't well mentally, and that she needed her medicine that was hard to get to her. As Christians, of course, we know she's not here and in heaven, and she's worshiping and enjoying, and probably hadn't even had time to look down here yet. But I got this lay next to her body and spent time with her body about 4 times this week, and each time it still didn't hit me. I thought she was going to wake up. I even tried to raise her from the dead one time this week, and that morning, actually, I went to the mall later. She had bought me this dog tag, and the chain broke, so I went to the mall to get it fixed. And I saw a female about 20, 30 feet in front of me, and she was wearing one of Mica's dresses, and she had the same tattoo Mica has on her arm and the exact same hair. And out of just instinct, I screamed, "Mica!" And the girl turned around, and it was one of her sisters. And I thought I raised her from the dead. She's alive, But I can't wait to see her again one day.
Now, that is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to some of JP's bizarre behavior after Mica's death. But the fact that he is playing this estranged and heartbroken husband after he essentially tormented Mica, and then has the audacity to act so sad after she's gone. She took her own life because she couldn't stand being under his pressure anymore. The audacity is just incredible to me. But Mica's sister, Sierra, who he mentioned, I think, in that video, mistaking Sierra for Mica, I believe it was Sierra, but Sierra has been at the forefront of this push for justice. And she actually is the one that spoke out about Mica essentially saying that she feared JP was going to kill her. So Sierra and the rest of the family have repeatedly called for the case to be reopened, emphasizing the evidence of JP's continued stalking, the planted GPS devices, and the chilling online harassment that Mica endured. For them, the pieces of the puzzle just do not add up to suicide, and there are too many loose ends and unanswered questions. Social media had also become a platform for raising awareness about Mica's case, with online communities and true crime enthusiasts questioning the official narrative, especially because of JP's bizarre behavior after the fact. But as more people learned about her story, the calls for a thorough investigation grew louder. Some had even suggested that JP's influence might have extended beyond Mica's personal life and into the investigation itself, pointing to the need for an independent review of the case. Mica's family has remained steadfast in their belief that she did not take her own life. And as they have continued to seek answers, they hope that more people will join them in demanding justice for Mica. Her story is really a stark reminder of the devastating effects of emotional and psychological abuse and of the lasting impact that such control can have on its victims. Mica's death, whether by her own hand or as a result of foul play, has left a profound void in the lives of those who knew and loved her. But as long as there are questions left unanswered, her family will keep fighting to uncover the truth of what happened to Mica Miller. Now, in the months after Mica's passing, a lot of footage has come to the surface of JP just acting super bizarre. And in one of the videos that has gotten a lot of attention, JP is laying in the grass beside his truck. So his park is His truck is parked in a driveway, and he is laying in the grass right beside his truck. He's acting like he's just frozen, and I would play the audio for you, but it's pointless because you can't understand anything he's saying. But this police officer walks up to JP, who's laying in the grass. The door to his truck is open. He's laying there, and he's talking like this. It's just, it's constant. That's how he's talking to the police officer. And the police officer is like, okay, well, do you need some help? And JP mumbles that he thinks there's ants on him or something. And the cop is like, well, there's no ants on you, but maybe that's how you feel, but there aren't any. I mean, you can kind of tell that the cop is like, I've seen my 2-year-old throw these kinds of tantrums and these like histrionics. I'm not really falling for it, but it's just bizarre. It's just this really bizarre behavior. That's the best word I can even use to describe it. Then just 2 months ago, JP went on Ashley Banfield's show on News Nation, and I'm going to play for you an excerpt of that interview, but the interview actually lasts for about an hour. This is only a 5-minute clip, but I just cannot believe the audacity he has to essentially blame her family and those who know her and love her for what ultimately happened to her. He's taking absolutely no ownership for the things that he put her through, but just take a listen.
Again, JP has not been charged with any crime related to Mica Miller's death. He also hasn't done much talking about all of this outside of a church service and a couple of text messages, but now he is talking. And he's talking with News Nation. The Reverend sat down with our Rich McHugh for a wide-ranging, gloves-off interview that you're not going to see anywhere else. It is at times uncomfortable. It is occasionally shocking. And some parts are just plain weird. I want to get straight to part 1. John Paul on the suicide, the speculation, the nonstop suspicion, plus the alibi that satisfied the police, if not his haters.
You and I have been talking since this happened, basically, communicating over text. Why now? Why the decision to speak now after all this time has passed? Where's your head at?
Well, I think part of it is I finally got the approval of my attorneys to do so. They, the ones working on the defamation cases, they said it's easier to win a defamation case the more the people talk. And so they've been collecting a lot of evidence over the past while. And also, I think that now that some of the emotion has died down in the world and with people that are led by their feelings, I think now they deserve to hear some logic and some truth and make their own assessment. So.
Do you miss her?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Did you see this coming?
Yes, but it doesn't change at all the power of the pain of reality. I saw it coming for years. I told them for years this would happen over, and I said if she gets off her medicine, suicide is the next thing. And she tried it in the past, but with me, she always remained okay with me. She was on her meds with me. She was healthy and happy. And even if she did get low or stop taking her medicine, I would help her get back on it, and things would be fine. Without me and with her family, she's off meds, and she committed suicide. And I told them this would happen over and over again. I tried my best to stop her from getting a gun. I went to judges. I have copies of all the police. I talked to her counselor, the pastor she was going to, her family, her friends. I told them all, don't let her get a gun. Do whatever it takes, prevent her from getting a gun. And when she was with me, she was never able to go that far. But with them, that's exactly what happened, and it destroyed me. And I still haven't really grasped it. Like it hasn't. I kind of keep putting off the reality of it, and I try not to think about it as much as I can.
What was going on in your marriage the week Mica died?
The week she died, we didn't talk that entire week. I'd emailed her several times that week, and my regular emails are sending her letters telling her that I love her, and
She came over to the house. The last time I saw her was a few weeks before she passed away. We spent about 4 hours together, and we hugged and kissed, and she was in and out of psychotic conversations. She would say, one thing about double agents that are following her. That was one of the phrases she would use when she was off her meds, double agents. And the other phrase she would say, she wants to come home so bad, but her family won't let her. She told me she wanted to live in Africa and asked me if I'd live with her. I said, sure, if you take your medicine, And so she told me if I'd give her some money and if I would write her a letter saying certain things in this letter that she would take her medicine. And so I tried that, but she desperately wanted to come home. She was just so afraid her family would disown her. And so the week before she passed away, I probably emailed her maybe 7 or 8 times that week just saying, I love you. You need your lithium. Don't forget who you are when you're on medicine versus who you are when you're off. She had lost 40 pounds in a month, and nobody that it was in her life thought to take care of her. Nobody. She was living with a former registered nurse. Her family, quote unquote, were taking care of her. She lost 40 pounds in 1 month, and no one thought she needed help. She was talking about living in Africa. No one thought she needed help. She's making videos on Facebook, and if you see the videos, you know it's not her because she has a different cadence, a different tone, a different amount of words per minute when she's healthy and on medicine than when she's off. And the way she was even looking into space when she's taking those videos, you knew she was delusional. And if somebody loved her enough to take her to a professional and say, okay, this woman says she's being abused, or this woman says, this, or she's lost 40 pounds in a month. If someone thought, I need to take her to a professional, that professional would have known that she needed medicine. And the reason I know that's true is because I took her a few weeks before she passed away. I took her to probate court. And in 3 minutes time, she went in, she walked back out. When I went in, they said, your wife is mentally ill and she needs medicine desperately. And I said, okay, let's do it. Let's get her the medicine. Let's get her help. And they said she's not a danger to anybody in society, so we can't force her to do it. But if one of her family members or friends had taken note of the way she was acting and seen what was happening to her physically and taken her to just one professional, they could have saved her life.
Now, before I end this episode, I want to touch on just a few things in regards to what he mentioned in that interview. So it is true that Mica purchased a gun shortly before she chose to take her own life. That is on surveillance footage. She is shown going into this gun shop, purchasing the gun that was ultimately used to take her own life. There is also a 911 call that Mica made the day that she took her own life, where she was basically saying where she was going to go so that her family could find her. So when it comes down to if I believe Mica committed suicide, I do believe that she committed suicide. However, I also believe that J.P. Miller is culpable for the abuse and the torment that drove her to that point. And I think it's very interesting that now he's playing this card of the heartbroken, devastated widow when just 4 days after Mica's death, he was seen out and about with his new alleged girlfriend, Susie Skinner. So I think that he is very manipulative, very dangerous, and I'm not sure what, if anything, is going to happen as far as culpability in this case, but I do think that Mica's story deserves to be told and shared, and if you know someone that is in a similar situation or a similar relationship, just do your best to support them, guide them to the right resources, and believe them when they tell you what they're going through. I do believe that Mica's friends and family believed her, but I also think that JP's influence and power that he had as a pastor of this church and in his community just became too great for Mica to bear. But that is all for today's episode of Mama Mystery. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next week. Mama Mystery out. Bye.